Chad, welcome back. Glad to have you on. So let's dive right into our topic today, which is going to be on the new normal in terms of remote work and revenue teams. You've been working live with a lot of different founders, a lot of different startups. First of all, I get like what have you seen? I mean, from COVID, everybody's talking about COVID lately, but let's dig in a little bit to the background and then how have you seen teams adjust? Who's doing it well and who's not doing it so well?
Yeah, so this is so huge right now. This topic, I find it's coming up a lot. So remote has happened to all of us really quickly, and COVID certainly accelerated that. But yeah, it's I would say across the board, it's been a huge issue for companies. It's a big challenge. We've moved from, the days of being in the office and being used to sort of have that tap on the shoulder, and we all don't love that, but there's that sort of working environment that everyone became very accustomed to and have been accustomed to, and this kind of depends on where you are as a business, but it's really hard, and that's why I think it's a good topic to dig into today, right? Especially when you're thinking about when we can talk specifically about sales teams and the revenue side of the organization, but in general, I think it's worth zooming out. I think we have to look at leadership. We have to relook all of these things in order to continue to strive as a business in 2020 and beyond. This isn't going anywhere. So I think it's worth taking a step back this time of year for a lot of, the founders listening. Like, we're going into a new year, right? Like, how can we rethink fundamentally how we're operating, how we're communicating? We're moving fundamentally from synchronous sort of meetings and communication to asynchronous and completely flexible. And to me, I'm passionate about this area. I think it's very exciting, frankly. I think we're moving to a world where we have the tools coming out our ears, right? We got lots of different ways to do this, but we're kind of starting from blank canvas, right? And luckily, there's a lot of companies out there that are publishing a lot about this. They're sharing how they do it, and they're doing it very well, and it's very obvious that they are. And we can get into some of those examples as well. But I think that's what we're really talking about today. As a company, we fundamentally need to change, right? Everyone's burnt out. There's the tweet I mentioned to you earlier that I saw in Tyler Tringus with Earnest Capital, and it was like creating a calm company. Create a calm company. It was more of a statement, and it's true. You look at not only the tech world, but in general, you're seeing people that are crazy burnt out, right? And this, people are at home, they have kids. One may walk into my office as we're talking here, right? Like, it is entirely new landscape, no matter what kind of work you do. And I think that anyone that's running a business, leading a business forward, we do have to really rethink the way that we work with our team, the way we think about flexibility, expectations, right, are changing too, and it's just important. And so I think that's what we should dig into now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so tons of opportunity here. So some companies are doing well, right? Like Shopify announced a while ago that it's going digital by default. It's doing this now. And including like their sales teams are pumping that up too. And these are normally, I mean, you'll hear from BDR sales leaders who are normally kind of running a boiler room and saying, I need to be around people. I need to see them making the cold calls. But we're seeing some sales teams say embracing this and doing really, really well. What do you think is separating the ones that are really, really strong versus the ones that probably are saying, man, we really need to get back into the office so I can watch everybody and pump them up all day?
Yeah, it's operations. It's we've talked about revenue operations as like the new term for it, but operations generally in the business being tight, documentation, you know, write things down. Most companies I see, that's the biggest thing. I think let's talk about that as a distinct topic. We're used to talking. We're used to having meetings. We're used to, and this is where it bleeds into the video calls that are endless and that everyone complains about. We need to start writing things down, and we need to get really, really clear on the handbook is I think the term a lot of people are using. The canonical examples, GitLab. For those that don't know GitLab, they're a DevOps platform, really, really interesting and amazing company. A lot of what they've published on this topic of remote is required reading from my perspective. And so they have an all remote guide. There's a ton you can dig into on this, but just in terms of, the asynchronous communication, meaning, we're not talking, we're writing things down, we're using open documents. So they speak to how they use, Google suite as an example, where everything's open to the company. It's about transparency. It's about, if anyone needs to know anything, they can read about it, they can learn about it, they can read the report at any time they want. What does that do? Well, it creates people. Some people like to work super early in the morning, or they want to get, an hour in while everyone's still sleeping, or at night, same thing, right? Like, you're able to work in a more broken up fashion, which again I think is required in this environment. And so starting from that as a first principle, right? Like, you need to write down your documentation, you need to write down your processes, you need to spend time on that foundation. That's going to enable your team to not have to ask those questions and be blocked, right? And not have to try and get on someone's calendar. And then you're constantly fighting this ping pong battle of internal calendar invites and Zoom and calls, and external for those that are, the sales and customer facing folks. So it becomes, you can see the chaos right there as I'm explaining it, right? You're thinking about internal and external. Like, it's wild. And everyone's facing this right now. Everyone. And yeah, so GitLab's a really good example to look at. The guys at, Jason and David over at 37 Signals, right? They wrote two books, one called Remote, one called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, which I think are also resources to point people to on this topic, right? It really comes down to unlocking the power of what remote actually means. And it's not about taking your, in office culture and just putting people in their house. So, it starts with the documentation. It starts with, you need to start building out a handbook that a new employee, think about it that way. A new employee comes into your business, they can look at a document. Notion's a great new tool people are using for this. That's I've been personally building out using, which I think is really, really helpful. And it's an awesome way to get organized. But you can start to write out, you have company homepage, you have like each function of your business. You can start to write how things work, how we work as a team. That stuff, writing, the power of writing that down is immense. And that's where not only writing things down, you can do video recordings like we're doing here right now using Zoom, or there's tools like Vidyard, there's tools like Loom. Even Vimeo came out with something recently where we're getting to screen recordings and video that is simple to do and very powerful, because now you have context, you have additional information that you might need on certain more complex topics and documents. You can add those into the mix and you can create a catalog. And so if I was, helping someone get started with this, that's where I would start, right? Start thinking about building your company's handbook, pull together your docs that are all over the place in Dropbox and Google Drive and wherever else it might be in people's heads, and start to catalog them one piece at a time and get people to contribute, and you'll really see things change.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you said it, because everybody's going through it right now, right? Like, this is a hard time, and we need to be upfront about that. Uh, what you just mentioned, so critical to have the processes rolling in, especially for new employees, just to actually tell them what their expectations are. The other big thing that's going on with sales teams, obviously, is everybody is having to iterate. Maybe you had product market fit before COVID and suddenly you're missing it. Maybe your messaging was working and now it's not resonating. Can't get the same meetings. All those metrics are down. MQLs are down, SQLs are down, demos are down, and revenue's down. So what I keep hearing is sales leaders desperately need visibility, and they felt like they got that visibility before by actually being in the office and just walking up and saying, hey, what's going on? They don't have that visibility, and they desperately need to iterate and test new things. So like, how do they approach that now? So one side is having it written down, but what I'm hearing is this lack of visibility into the tests, what they're testing.
Yeah, so let's make it more concrete, right? Writing things down. We all know there's a lot going on. Emails, like, there's a lot of energy going into places and prioritization, right? Writing things down process wise. Let's just talk through process. Okay, there's the customer journey side of things, just how do we operate externally, and then there's a similar one that's more internal, which we're talking about. But I think you need to take it down a level into those software tools, or into the workflow of the individual on the team, right? So we can talk about each different function. That's focused on sales. So in sales, okay, I'm an account executive. I'm responsible for bringing in revenue. I have a quota. I have expectations, for for myself, but also as a business, it's a much more of a black and white role, right? Because like usually these inputs from historical reference
Mhm.
turn into this revenue, and you can look at that, monthly and quarterly and annually, and that's a nice thing about sales. But in creating a good environment, though, the software tools that are used need to do a lot of that for us, right? You need to set up the tools appropriately so that the individual burden is very minimal. And, I would term that sales enablement or enablement more broadly. But what that means is the individual seller should not be dealing with all of the burden of extra things, right? We need to make sure it's easy. So, as an example, a lot of teams are just not instrumented well. That's the term I like to use, but instrumented in terms of their CRM or of their reporting cadence for asynchronous needs, dashboarding, reporting, how that's communicated out, not just having it, that it's in Salesforce or it's in Clarity or wherever it is. It's actually communicated, right? It's sent out on a cadence. So people don't have to, I don't have to go places. I don't have to remind myself all the time to go do things. It literally comes to me. So thinking about that's a big thing. So again, that's communication by default as it is. So you know that on Friday at this time or whenever the particular cadence is, that things are communicated and how they're communicated to the team or the individual or communicating up in the organization as well, right? So again, this is where the operational rigor kind of comes in and is again required, especially with the acceleration we're seeing towards remote and digital first work and business. So that's what I would say about that. I mean, again, there's it gets a little bit complicated, but that's not overthink it. We know the rhythm of our particular business. We're speaking, a lot to B2B here. And, you're selling to a business, there's a business transaction that takes place. There's a sales cycle in order to get there. We sort of have a sense of what that looks like, or we're working towards it if we're super early. But from there, now we can actually understand, okay, well, this is what marketing means and matters to us. So this is how the data points are going to be captured and how they're going to be communicated. Same thing goes for sales. So within the sales cycle, okay, great. Like how many meetings, how many meetings did I have this week? Customer facing, those quality conversations, like these true inputs that we know and should study that drive outcome. We can get that stuff dialed in, and really it's one document. You look at your business, you say these are the metrics that matter, and that's a distilling. You have to distill them, but there's a lot out there on this, and we could talk about it in another session. But the reality is, look at those, make it as simple as possible, know the levers that you can pull in your business, and just make sure that those are tracked and they're communicated on a cadence. That's it. People don't need to think about it. People know that their work is getting captured. They know that that's going to be, coming out for everyone to see. And the company then can be working on a rhythm and on a cadence. And I find that to be, as a first pass at a key point, that's a big one that you can get more concrete about right away. And it's going to do a lot for you.
So what are some of the tools that you would say, I mean, from your experience now that kind of seem almost critical or table stakes to have in this new remote world and kind of COVID world? Because I could call out one right away in terms of Gong or Chorus and actually being able to pivot and iterate on messaging. You kind of need to have stuff like that now. Like, we don't have time to wait 3 months or 4 months running in Salesforce, pulling reports out of the CRM to figure out what messaging is working. Like, you needed to adapt really, really quickly. And if something else is working or new competitors popped up, you need to be able to analyze that and adapt to it fast, especially now.
Yeah. Oh, my favorite topic, tools. There's lots. We can make a list, and anyone that's interested, we can get into this separately in terms of sort of the stack and whatnot. But yeah, you mentioned a couple there. I think from a seller standpoint, like Gong and Chorus, big fan of those. Like just having call recordings and context around those engagements that are taking place, and what a great conversation looks like for the other side of the table at a discovery stage, at a demonstration stage, as you're getting into pricing discussions. That's like the best, that's the best for coaching. I spend a lot of time in there doing that with founders and leadership, myself in support, but also, thinking about how you train folks, enabling again a new hire. It's awesome. Right? Here's a great example of that call one, discovery call. Here's a great example of now, you mapping that understanding into the demo, et cetera, et cetera. And now you have this playbook that's live, that's real. It's not on just a piece of paper. So I think getting to sort of video and this screen sharing, I get really excited about that on this topic. So that's where I mentioned like Loom, Vidyard, local company here in KW, amazing team, doing a lot for digital first. And Michael Litt, their CEO, has actually been posting a lot of great content on this topic around digital first, future of work, which I love. So those are two like examples of screen recording tools. So you can quickly like, okay, instead of me having to get on a call with Mark as an example, right, and us talking through something, I can write it down in a document or bullet form and just make it concise. I could share that with you as like first option. Second option is I can actually write it down. I can record myself talking over it. So I can record my screen and say, Mark, here's what I was thinking about from our meeting the other day. Here's what I'm looking for, an answer from you on, and some next steps, etc. That can then be shared with you. And you can see how that works internal or external in a beautiful way, because you're bringing, yourself to it the same way you would on a live call. So I think about it as live versus not live, and that's the big difference. So those are some pretty powerful tools. You get into, again, documentation. I think the wiki thing again, or the handbook thing, separating it from your document storage is a key thing, I would say. Meaning, okay, Google Drive,
Yeah.
Dropbox. We all know, especially for those that are listening, that are maybe in a bigger company. I mean, it's a mess. It's a disaster, right? Yeah. You have like my drive, shared drives. Like, I mean, some companies are better than others, but the ones that are better than others are good at what we're talking about, right? So you're actually separating concerns. So I like to think about it when I'm working with companies on this area. It's separate the documents, like, and where they're stored for like that can be a certain purpose. Like, is Google Sheets amazing? Absolutely. Is Google Slides useful for slide deck software? Yes. Those use cases are for that. But in terms of like organizing documentation on what people need to be reading, and that gets refreshed and needs to be tightly organized, get it out of there. Get it out. So I recommend Notion as a good option to look at. There's other ones as well. Coda. These are some of the newer tools that I would push towards people. They're more collaborative. They're nicer to use, and they fit this purpose a lot better. They also have templates, so you can get started that much easier because there's templates to start using for these things. So separating, that's a big thing. So again, that comes back to what we already talked about. Outside of that, I mean, there's definitely stuff, some newer stuff that's come out that I've been playing around with. I mean, pitch.com is a new presentation software that just launched actually like 2 weeks ago. That is really cool. If you want to check that out, it's, basically a better version of Google Slides, or at least that's what they're aiming to do, where you can just create beautiful presentations quite easily. I've been spending a lot of time in Figma, that I know definitely the design community and product folks would certainly know about, but even on the commercial side, and where my where I typically am in my headspace, it's still really helpful to kind of just like be able to diagram things out and design some slides or some thoughts in visual format, as opposed to just text. So that's a cool one. But yeah, I could go on and on. I think when it comes to the tools, definitely dig in, do your research, and play and test with some of the newer tools that are out there, because as you're starting to figure out this stack, as it were, in your business, it's really important that you make some of those decisions earlier. Again, like we've talked a lot on this show about foundation, and I think this is one that is overlooked as well, right? We can talk about CRM and specific to like sales process and whatnot, but from a company perspective, trying to get these different functions to be more organized from the get-go, just in terms of how you see the business evolving even earlier as a founding team or as an early group, is very, very powerful, because you're going to have that much quicker ability to bring someone on. You're going to have that much quicker ability to point them to stuff that they can consume on their own time and in their own energy. And again, that comes full circle to what we're talking about. So those are some ideas as it relates to tools and software that people can check out.
And I'm curious too, and we can definitely list those out and send them out. I'm curious too on what you're hearing on the ground from folks about returning to normal versus not returning to normal, because we're in Q4, right? We're in Q4 in a devastating year for a lot of companies. and they were counting on their classic huge trade shows or some of these other events that just didn't take place. They were counting on a few customers that got stalled out. So many different things went awry, right? So it's like I'm almost wondering from those teams, are they hoping in 2021 that all their old trade shows are going to come back to get a whole bunch of new leads and complete the same funnel, or have they really kind of said no, we need to change everything? Like what are those conversations like now?
Yeah, so dependent on industry. I think, for the companies that do rely on like trade shows and more of that, a lot of in person, that's been devastating for them, obviously. I think though, from I guess the broader perspective is that just everything, back to this whole topic, is going more digital and more,
It's
where
not
we're all
going
more
away.
capable. We're all more capable of doing business in a remote fashion with good communication externally, with all the things that we talked about as ideas on this in this discussion, right? We can do asynchronous stuff with folks in other companies, right? We can use the leverage of video and leverage of just good quality documentation and communication to our advantage. And so I think that's a learning curve for, we're talking a lot about newer companies that are sort of digital first. So obviously it's a lot easier. It's still hard, but it's a lot easier for them just because they're newer companies. It's a lot harder when you have a 200, 500,000 person organization that is just more mature in its process. That's a lot of change management, which is where I see a big area of focus on this topic, is that area. Like, you think enterprise businesses or just businesses that are at that size, there's a lot there that they need to change and have been changing as relates to hardware they're using and for homes. And there's a lot of great stories about that people can look up. But I think, fundamentally it is not only changing the environment for businesses internally and how they think about, people being distributed and flexible and remote, but also how they engage with their customers, right? It's an entire stakeholder thing, right? It's partners, it's investors, it's customers, it's employees, it's everyone. It's the four stakeholder groups are all affected by this. So I think you need to look at each one of those separately. We've been mainly speaking to the internal team, which I think you have to start there. That's in your core, that's in your control the most. So think about how you support your employees, how you create a calm, sustainable, you know, workplace. That means when you have meetings, when you don't have meetings, when people are expected to do things and not do things, and how reactive versus proactive it is. Think about, those are the prompts I would give people. And then you can start working through those external ones more, right? Again, investors, if you have them, it's a bit probably a nice second place to start because they're closest to your business from that perspective. And then partners, and then, obviously customers, you go that much further out in the spectrum. And I think just being deliberate about it is the key. This is how we operate as a company. And go and read everything that GitLab has to say, or the experts that are out there that have done this in an amazing way, right? I mean, GitLab, I don't know exact numbers, but like something like 200 employees to 1,000 employees in like 18 months or some short period of time, due to everything we just talked about. So like that's like crazy for a lot of people to think about, especially those that are building companies, but it's happening and it's true. And the reality is, it's because they've been very thoughtful about how they document what they do, how people can read up on it and get onboarded, literally self-serve in different roles, how they can recruit because of that, how they can open up distributed capability in how they hire, where they hire. All these things are such an advantage. So I think, again, let's start from first brick of the foundation, right? Like, start internal, look at your current processes, where are things. You have a lot more accumulated knowledge in your own head or in your team's documents than you think. So get someone tasked with starting to focus on that. Look at Notion as a good starting point. Maybe play with some of the wiki templates they have and just start to think through, like, what's a good sort of canvas for me to start organizing my team around in terms of how we work and how we create value. It all starts to move pretty well for you there. And the sales team side of this that we wanted to touch on specifically, same thing. It's no different, right? sales has its own rhythm. I think about the cadence is kind of sales and finance is pretty tightly coupled. And then you have product and marketing. It's pretty tightly coupled, right? In terms of launching and just the way it works, which again, separate topic we can dig into. But from a sales perspective, like think about how your team needs to focus on their external duties. Think about how you meet, make sure that you're instrumenting your sales ops and your revenue operations so that folks don't have to go finding things. It's surfaced to them,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that allows them to individually get better, and then at an aggregate level the team is just going to be that much more aware, and there's going to be more there's just going to be more awareness of everything that's happening, which is going to help everyone.
Yeah, and this is a good time to and I'm so glad that you're mentioning things like Notion and just having the documentation, because whether you like it or not, especially now, people are going to get pulled into those conversations. Hey, how do I do this? Do you have that deck? Like, these are happening all over your company. You just don't see it because you're not in the office, but they're happening all day, every day, and they're seriously like dragging on time. So GitLab's a good example of a company that's actually be able to handle that.
Yeah, and you can mimic the there's other examples too. This is a good focus, so you can dig around and look and see what fits for you. But the pushback I always get is just like, it's back to I don't have time, and this and
That,
that.
but
It's
that's the
like
crazy thing right
you don't
now.
have
Yeah.
yeah, you don't have a choice to not have time. It's back to like the whole where your time should be spent. We all understand that this isn't super easy, but thinking it through is the first step. You know, back up the bus a little bit and say, okay, where are we? And do a bit of an evaluation. Reflect on everything that's going on right now. You all, as we're talking here, are seeing the Slack messages fly, and DMs are this and that. And to your point, trying to find that deck template or do that. And it's chaos, right? It's like, oh man, like I'm trying to, it's hard enough, right? It's hard enough. Sales is hard. Building businesses is hard, really hard. We're trying to create value and bring great things to people's lives. I mean, let's try and work on the inside of the house, um, so that we can do that, and we can grow sustainably, and we can and you're gonna be able to the whole thing that runs off this is you're gonna be able to hire the best people out there because you've done this, right?
For
That's what
sure.
the best people want, the calm culture. They're going to interview you in the process to see if what it's like. So as a founder and as someone leading teams, if you can dig into this and get it focused, it's going to pay massive dividends for you.
Yeah, totally. No, it's such a good message. I mean, we get it, right? It's Q4. We're down. Everybody wants more right now. And like, you don't have the time to set up these processes, but also if you don't have the time to do this now, you're never going to have the time, because this is the best time and the only time to do all this, right? If you weren't able to pivot messaging going into COVID, you have to be able to pivot on messaging coming out of it, right? Like, you're just,
Mm-hmm.
this stuff is just key to survival.
Hire for it. Like, I mean, there's really no excuse if that's not your skill set or whatnot. Hire someone to focus on it, own the project, go external, get people to help you. There's a lot of great subject matter experts in this area. Like, I don't think there's an excuse. Like, I would push back on that to say, you have the time, make it a priority, and get someone to own it, and just watch it evolve. And so, like anything, I think it just takes focus, and we're talking about a major time in history here of refocus and digital acceleration. So companies everywhere are facing it. Everybody's in the same boat. That's kind of like the irony of what's going on with COVID, is that it's bringing us all together on some of this stuff because we're all facing it at the same time. Like, you can't really say that for a lot of other periods, right, in existence. Things happen to certain markets, things happen to certain, teams, but they don't happen to everyone at the same time. That's happening right now. And so I think that's where it's good to come together and have these conversations and like help others, because we're all facing it. And if we can sort of build up those resources, build up that thinking, and I'm happy to talk to anyone that wants to chat about this. I think it's definitely something I'm passionate about, as you can probably tell, but it's I've seen it completely change a company in a given month, right? Just like in a given function or in a given team, just like getting organized is powerful. And it's amazing how content can scale for you as a company too, right? So think about that. I think is a parting message for everyone.
Yeah, well, I think that's as good a place as any to put a stop there. But Chad, man, always great to have you on here, brother.
Thanks, man.